my coffee and today's guest here with me, so we're ready to roll. Welcome to our Circular Coffee Break podcast, where we will be talking about everything circular and beyond. We're actually well into season 2 of the Circular Coffee Break podcast, and we hope that you got some interesting new perspectives and ideas to drive circularity and sustainability in your organizations as well as in your private life. As we're looking to make the podcast as relevant and interesting as possible for all of you listening out there, we're naturally eager to hear your thoughts, ideas, and feedback. So please have a comment on our webpage, circularcoffeebreak.com, or drop us a note at circularcoffeebreak@gmail.com. But now, without further ado, let's get started. So my guest today is a pioneer in human innovation. His thought-provoking keynotes on sustainability and human innovation are actually internationally recognized, and he emphasizes the need to basically recode innovation to shape a more relevant, more beautiful future for all of us. His work centers around the intersection of ethics, technology, and design, advocating for a balance that benefits both humanity and the environment. As an advocate for radical thinking and new methods, he challenges conventional norms and inspires innovation rebels to create positive change. Since January 2010, he has been leading Indeed Innovation, a global design and innovation consultancy that helps organizations create circular solutions for a sustainable future. He's also an active advisor, speaker, and author on topics related to circular economy, innovation, and design. And he has published several books and articles, such as 10 Moral Questions and the AI Toolbook. So if you're interested, you can have a look at those and order them. Welcome to the show, Karel Golta.
Thank you, Michael. Glad to be here.
Great to have you, and really looking forward to our discussion today. Maybe to get us started, could you share with us what inspired you to focus on circular economy principles, and how do you see them transform industries and businesses and basically all parts of our life?
Yeah, thank you for this great intro. And the first question that is sometimes not easy to answer, because I ponder myself upon when did it actually happen? And I really have to go back probably, into my youth and maybe even kindergarten time to see that there are building blocks and steps that evolved eventually, where I became more conscious of what it actually means innovating in today's time and space. But there is, of course, a moment, I call it the Oppenheimer moment, okay? My personal Oppenheimer moment. And that was 2019, that the barrel was just overflowing, basically. So I could not continue doing what I was been doing for the last 2 decades almost, meaning, innovating for the sake of relentless growth, for continuous improvement of mostly, economics and performance issues, and of course, sales-driven aspects of consumer brands, B2B brands, and things like that. But there was a moment, as I said, in 2019, where I really questioned if what I'm doing, the footstep I leave on the planet, is this really what I should be doing? So very personal, I would say. And yes, I do see, so I'm obviously not the first one, and I do see quite a bit of companies, starting to change. The question is always, how radically do you want to do it? How courageous are you to really go all the way? But I see a transformation, of course, coming also from regulations and government bodies and things like that.
Very, very interesting, and I think what you're saying is basically resonating very well. It's a journey, isn't it? I mean, you start somewhere, and then over time, you realize things, you see things, and they make you reconsider your worldview, reconsider your values, reconsider what you're doing in that context. You're working as an advisor, and you're a speaker, keynote speaker in events. Do you have some success stories or case studies that you've seen where you have been working in the area of circular design and innovation that actually have been driving a significant positive impact in that context?
Yeah, absolutely. Luckily, when we really pivoted my company, Indeed Innovation, to only focus on sustainability and in that realm onto circular services and products and business models, we had quite a few opportunities to do that for large global corporations and smaller ones. We have a case, for example, for Google in the United States, where we're looking into bringing systems to life that helps actually bring back TVs to either recyclers or to a second life. Because you have to understand, in the United States, it's not like that, like in Germany, where you have recycling centers that consumers bring their products back. It's a really different systems over there. And the problem is that the recyclers, they would say like, hey, you know what, if you bring the TV right in front of my foot door or doorsteps, then I can do something with it. But if I have to go all the way to the consumers and get it, that's a problem. Now, for Google, for example, and this is the beauty about the industry's regulations in part, if you look at the greenhouse gas protocol, for them, they're responsible as Google for their scope 3 emissions, okay? For TVs. Why? Because their Google TV apps is running or needs the ecosystem of TVs, despite their not being the manufacturers, right? They are responsible for it. So they have an interest, a genuine interest in actually making sure they can close the loop there. And this is where we then, developed a service that actually Uber and Lyft and other carriers can use their empty drives that they often have to actually bridge that gap and reduce the costs for the reverse logistics that you have. So this is, for example, one case in China. We did packaging optimization at scale for a German retailer, Aldi, that is really big in China as well, mainly in Shanghai, looking at their entire packaging portfolio to identify what are actually the materials that they use in the packaging that at the end of life have the capacity and are being recycled and go back into the stream. Because there is a difference between something is recyclable and something is being recycled. And this is where we always focus on. We want to create impact by not going greenwashing and say like, hey, it's theoretically possible, but really to check in the systems, how can we truly change the bottom line and make an impact? And so there are tons of other for white good manufacturers, making sure that designing the components in a way and looking for opportunities to actually circle back valuable product assets, because this is what the circular economy is about, and this is why it is such a huge opportunity for also old-fashioned business. Because if you think about it, up to the sales moment, they create value, but once they sell it, that thing is off, but the value still remains in materials and in other aspects. And this is, I think, the most fascinating part about it. Yes, you can go about, let's save the world, and 45% of the emissions are related to the product and not to the energy in the product. But in the end, right now, there's a huge business opportunity right there.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think again, what you're saying is really interesting, because there's two aspects to it that I would maybe like to briefly address. On one side, you've been talking about the Google example, and there you naturally talk about an ecosystem play where you need to involve very many different parties to actually make circularity happen in order to make sure the TV sets arrive at the recycler knows what to do with it, and so on and so forth. How do you see this ecosystem component, and how do you see companies basically being able to embrace that? Because traditionally companies were very self-sufficient. They were focusing on their own operations and optimizing that. Now we're asking them to think circular, think ecosystem, think much broader than that. Do you have any experiences there?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely, and I cannot express the importance of this enough, right? First of all, if you look at the history of innovation and innovation management, right, we've seen in the year around 2000 where open innovation was propagated. So that was already a start where companies opened up outside of their competitive environment to say, like, hey, let's collaborate with external stakeholders to see if we can gain mutual benefit. Honestly, mostly at that time, it was still like, can we steal ideas from others? At least this is my perception in quite a few cases I lived myself through.
Yeah.
But nowadays, there is a growing understanding that this race can only be won together for once, right? Because the climate is everywhere. So it doesn't matter if the Chinese, the Russian, the Americans, or the Germans have different attitudes. It's still the same climate. So we can only win this race together. But the second part is that companies, if they really want to make a viable business model out of it, they will realize that they only can actually gain access to these very complex value streams if they work together. And this is no wonder. Why? Because also when you build a new product or service, you need to rely on so many stakeholders upstream, right? So there's no wonder that downstream, you need the same kind of complexity. But if you really want to tap into it, now what you have to do is go away from this downstream linearity thinking, that most vendors and relationship people do with stakeholders, but you have to find different stakeholders. My dearest example is like, how can you turn used diapers into new wallpapers? Think about that. There are a lot of synergies in that ecosystems. It doesn't matter if it's real or not. Actually, it is in parts, but it's you go nuts because this is not by nature a stream that usually goes right. You would say like, well, out of a used car, I make a new car again. But making out of a used diaper, wallpapers, or anything like that, this is quite crazy. But this is exactly the beauty about ecosystem thinking.
No, I fully agree. At the same time, it naturally adds a significant level of complexity, isn't it? I mean, one of the areas I've been looking into currently is agricultural side streams and how they could be used in other industries, be it cosmetics or other areas. But all of a sudden, you think outside of your industry, you need to open up your innovation process much wider to actually think about completely new ways of interacting, completely new ways of use cases of services, which leads me to the second point. You mentioned that this naturally opens up a possibility for companies. Earlier you would sell your product and then in most cases you would never ever see the customer again. Now if you think about circular models, it enables you to have a customer relationship that goes way beyond the point of sales, into a circle, into additional services, be it repair, be it refurbish, and so on. So I think that also is very interesting in the innovation process and needs to be considered very differently, isn't it?
Absolutely, Michael. And it's also here the complexity you addressed before. It is there, and everyone hopes, of course, can there please be a silver bullet? But no way, it cannot be, because our ecosystem, if you look at nature, is hyper complex, right? This is by far complex that we can comprehend. Now, I think the beauty is in these collaboration aspects is that you can tap into so many different aspects of it. And if you really want to make a business model come to life, I think, and also look into the future, what it really means if we really want to go towards a circular economy, we have to stop thinking about ownership, right? Ownership is a problem because it's a dead end, right? And literally, I mean a dead end because, as they say in German, your last shirt has no pockets, okay? Yeah. And it's very obvious. So, but what is the alternative? The alternative is actually accessibility. Okay, so we need to switch from ownership to accessibility because it means you can still access anything you want, anything you owned before, but without these aspects that it's a dead end, that it remains in your cellar, in your dead stock, and so forth.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you mentioned that. And related to that, I mean, how do you see the balance between economic growth, which for many years has basically been the measure of success in most businesses? So between economic growth and the environmental responsibilities or the sustainability responsibilities, maybe in that context, and in the circular business models, because there naturally is a balance that you need to hit at the end of the day.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to call it balance. It's the elephant in the room, right? It's the elephant in the room. And now anyone can switch off their podcast thingy right now if they don't want to listen to that. The reality is, of course, we have to stop to believe that endless growth is possible, right? I mean, this is not possible. But that doesn't mean that we have to go back to the caves. It doesn't mean that we don't have, things that we can have fun with, or that we stop flying, or have vacation, or barbecues, or I don't know what. All the things that people are fearing of believing. It just means that we have to view it a little bit differently, but it's not that it's going to be less, okay? And I think this is the biggest part, because if you think about an ecosystem, a closed ecosystem that we can have all the aspects actually in all areas of the planet if we want to, just probably not the same. I give you 2-3 examples. First of all, if I live in the sub-Sahara zone, I probably do not need a gas heater, right? Like I need in northern part of Germany because winter can be cold, right? So they don't need the same thing. The same goes for food. If you think about nowadays, if I go to a supermarket, at least not in the States where it's 24/7, but let's say in Europe where it's like, it might close at 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night. If I expect that all the bread assortments or all vegetables are still there to its fullest capacity so that I have the choice of everything, well, then we have an issue, right? Because then we will have the remaining 70% of food waste that we usually have between farm to fork. So that's the second. And everyone that starts to think will say, like, yeah, that doesn't make sense, right? So if we switch that, we can do so much more with so much less, and therefore become circular without losing any life quality.
Yeah, I fully agree, and it's naturally also back to the definition of what is wealth, what is value. I mean, we're going back to the wealth of nations kind of definition very, very often, which is an industrial, very old definition that hasn't really been living up to our times today. I think today, when we talk about wealth, when we talk about growth, we need to look at it through a different lens. I still believe we can have wealth across the globe, actually, at the end of the day. I'm a strong believer of that. But that doesn't necessarily mean we have to produce more and more product and more things to drive that growth, to drive that wealth.
Exactly. And let me give 2 examples here. Again, one just to make it sure. Do you need to have a private jet? Do you need to have 16 cars? Do you need to have a yacht? No one needs that. Literally, no one needs that. And I think 99.99% of the planet's population would agree with me that. And that has nothing to do with capitalism or anything like that, right? And it's not about socialism. It's just like, you don't need that. But now, really talking for businesses, right? I've been talking to a company that is developing vacuum pumps. Okay, something very industrial, vacuum pumps. Okay, what they create is, pumps that create vacuums for other industries. So, and they're thinking, in order to transition to the circular economy, they, of course, what others are doing as well. You sell your pump and then you maintain it, repair it. You can even refurbish it, right? That's okay. But that only goes to a certain extent, because if you want to grow somehow, you still have to compete with others, do this and that and things like that, right? So there's always a business case also to be lost. But what they're really thinking into is the following. They're saying like, okay, let's not sell to our customers pumps, because what they actually need is cubic meters of vacuums generated, right? So that's a first switch. And this is what I mean if you think about, materiality to services. That's one thing. But now they go further, because you go like, well, that's still, if you were a customer and you wanted to have the cubic meter of vacuum, what's the next thing you would want to have? And what is important to your business? Well, probably, first of all, price stability, but actually, that there is a competition. So you always want to improve on your cost structure. This will remain, because also nature is improving itself all the time. So the next thing is that they don't sell you that not even, they don't even sell you the cubic meter of vacuum that they generate. They actually tell you that over the next 5 years, we're going to decrease year on year 2% of the costs that this vacuum does cost you. And this is the fascinating part, because then certainly circularity makes a lot of sense, because you are in an ecosystem of dependency. The customer knows that if you don't give him back the parts and things like that, and have access to the data that generates that this pump generates, your vendor will not be able to reduce your operating costs. That, I think, is beautiful thinking in a very, very sophisticated business way that no one that loves the circular economy or the linear economy will deny that there's an advantage in the circular economy.
Yeah, I think this is a very good point, and I've recently been involved in a project around handprint. So basically, the idea of companies creating a positive impact, a handprint in opposite to a footprint for their customers. So basically, exactly along the lines of what you're saying, I am, as a provider, as a company, I'm actually creating a positive impact in the form of circular business models, sustainable business models for my customers. And with that, basically, I create additional differentiation, additional value for my customers as well as for society as a whole. And I think that requires a quite significant mindset shift in many organizations. And requires a lot of collaboration between different stakeholders in that setup. So, how do you see the role of different stakeholders in that context, and how they need to change, but also contribute in order to drive for circularity, drive for these sustainable ways of doing business?
So, I think this is a transformation as probably as big as the digital transformation that has started, 25 years or more actually ago, because it's thinking in loops and or anti-linear, means thinking in systems. And this is just something we humans are not really good at, right? Unless we're really, it's kind of a duality. We have to look at our more implicit brain structure, right? So gut feeling. Gut feeling is much more systems thinking, if you think like, than our brain, because there we try to apply logic and linear shortcuts and things like that. So that's a complicated part. And we have to teach not only people, but actually reorganize organizations so that they can comply with circularity. And nowadays, I would say most companies don't like that. They don't want to transform over transform. But what I, Michael, personally observe is it's the first time that the masses of the employees would accept that, because whenever we approach customers with that, their employees love that, because for the first time they see sense and a purpose in this transformation. I always say before, when you had like someone elderly, at the end of her or his career, having to learn, programming, dealing with Excel, stuff like that. When they did that before in a spreadsheet, let's go really back in time. They were like, why the heck should I do that? Just so my boss or my other higher stakeholder is making more profit. But today, when you tell the people, hey, why we're actually going for circularity, they go like, darn, finally that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. At the same time, I think one difficulty is that circularity actually needs a very holistic approach across the organization, and I think that's where the other parallel to the digital side of things comes from. The CDO was put in place at some point in time in a lot of companies exactly for that reason, because you needed to have someone who has a mandate to drive digital change across the organization. And I think in a lot of organizations, you still have very many different people, roles, units taking a step at sustainability and circularity. The product development guys, the sales guys, the marketing guys, the operations guys, everyone is basically having a little bit of their own approach and their own angle to it. So I think at the end of the day, we need to move more to this holistic approach in order to be able to address that. And I think the examples you mentioned are reflecting that very well. Do you have any experiences of how companies have made that happen? How you can do things across the organization and be successful with that?
There are actually tons of examples out there. Honestly, at the same time, have they only been a lighthouse? That's a question that is still unanswered, I would say. But let me give you. I know, for example, from Cisco, they in the US, they made a tremendous effort in reskilling their entire organization towards circularity. We have a customer ourselves, Vitra Furniture, a very acclaimed furniture manufacturer in Europe, that has undergone through such a program where they really across all silos, horizontal organization structure, they train the people and put together in teams, because this is again the beauty about it. You don't go silent that you say, hey, you are procurement, you have to make sure you get the cheapest stuff. You guys are logistics, you have to make sure things get from A to B. You are product development and you're marketing. But if you put them all together on a project,
Exactly.
they can actually work in these systems level, because that's a system you have to untangle or to make vibration.
I mean, related to that, I mean, you're a thought leader. You've been working with a lot of different companies and organizations. What are some of the challenges you foresee in actually making circular practices, circular economy approaches mainstream, and how can we overcome those?
So first, up front, I tell you, I'm super confident this happens. Don't forget, this movement is super young. We have 200 years of this classical super linear economy, and we are just talking the longest, maybe 9 to 10 years that the concept of a circular economy has been publicized. So that just as a starter, right? So, hey, if you get frustrated along the way, I get it sometimes too, right? But don't be. We are at the very beginning. We didn't even see the inflection point of a hockey stick. But I think what it really takes, first of all, is the responsibility of the advisory boards. Okay, because those are the ones that tell the CEO what in 5 to 10 years needs to happen. Second is, hey, it's, for example, in the EU taxonomy, CSRD, CSDDD, stuff like that. All these regulations, they're great, because that's the only way we can start. Either you start as a company yourself, top down, telling, hey, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go for the challenge, right? And there is a challenge, because potentially, I mean, not only potentially, in reality, in the end, you will have probably less profitability in terms of, you won't earn after, income tax and everything that much anymore, because that's part of the systems, I would say, to sustain. But that we are talking about 50 years in the future. For the next 5 to 10 years, anyone switching towards that will be the company that is probably going to be most resilient, not only to the regulations, because they're super, super lame, I would say still, but actually they're going to be at the forefront, like back then, 25 years ago, the Googles and the really cool banking people that really got it, what actually digitalization and digital transformation means. So I see a lot of fortune there. Because last but not least, again, don't forget that we produce 100 billion tons of material every year, and 90% of it goes up to chimney or on landfill. Hey, that's value. Someone needs to make just money out of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I agree with you. I think we're getting quite easily impatient with the progress that we're seeing, but I think we're talking about a very significant change, a systemic change of a system that has been in place for a long period. So I think we actually need to give ourselves some time, unfortunately, time that we don't necessarily always have in this area, but things are progressing. I fully agree. Now, the coffee is empty, and it's actually time to wrap up this episode. But before I let you go, Karel, what advice would you give to aspiring innovators and entrepreneurs who actually want to contribute to this more circular, more sustainable future?
To keep it short, Michael, I think we need pictures of a desirable circular economy. everyone is talking why it's not working, why this business model doesn't work today, and things like that. The problem is when we talk about the circular economy, no one has actually, I literally in a visual picture in front of them, what it actually means to live in a circular economy. So whenever you're innovating, paint that picture. What is it for you that a circular economy would really be admirable for? And then we have a target to go for.
Perfect. No, a perfect way to wrap up, to basically create a picture, create a vision that we can all agree on and work against. Thanks a lot, Karel, for joining me today. Really interesting. And, we could have discussed for another half hour easily on the topic. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Michael, for having me on your show. Thank you.
Cool. For all of you listening out there, as always, we hope today's episode was interesting and inspiring, gave you some new perspectives and some new ideas. If you like the podcast, you can help us out growing the Circular Coffee Break community by giving us a 5-star rating and a positive review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're getting your podcasts. Also, please remember to subscribe to stay in the loop on new episodes. There's already a lot of new topics and guests that we are looking at to bring to you to provide even more interesting and new perspectives. All for me left is to thank you for tuning in today, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of you here on the Circular Coffee Break podcast.